How avoidants struggle after pushing away the one who cared? You know what's tragic? It's not just the loss of someone who loved you, it's realizing too late that your defenses weren't protecting you. They were robbing you. Avoidants, the ones who keep love at arm's length, often believe that distance equals safety. But what happens when the person who truly saw them, truly stayed, finally walks away? That's when the silence gets deafening. Because avoidance doesn't stop time, it only delays the consequences. They push away someone who showed patience, who didn't give up easily, who stayed through mixed signals and emotional shutdowns. But eventually that person stops knocking, stops texting, stops fighting for space in a heart that kept the door shut. And suddenly, the avoidant is left alone, not in peace, but in pain. Because here's the truth, when the one who cared is gone, avoidants don't feel relieved. They feel haunted. They replay moments, read old messages, stalk social media trying to feel close in the only way they now can, through a screen. But connection doesn't come in pixels. It came in presence, and it's gone now. They thought freedom meant no responsibility, but now they see love was never a trap. It was a gift, and what they thought was strength, avoiding vulnerability, was actually fear in disguise. But here's the hope: this pain can become a turning point if they're willing to stop running, to sit with the discomfort, to understand that self-protection shouldn't come at the cost of love. Because yes, avoidants struggle after pushing love away, but the struggle isn't the end. It's the beginning. If they're brave enough to feel, to heal, and to show up differently next time. Avoidance often begins as a way to stay safe. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, closeness can feel threatening, even if they crave connection deep down. Their emotional reflex is to pull away when things get intense, especially when someone starts to genuinely care. That caring feels dangerous, not because it is, but because it awakens parts of them they've spent years trying to suppress: vulnerability, dependence, the fear of being seen and then left. So they protect themselves. They pull back when conversations get real. They brush off compliments, downplay affection, change the subject when emotions arise. They keep people guessing, keep their distance, and convince themselves they're just not ready or need space. To them, this feels like strength. It feels like control, like they're managing their emotions, keeping things from getting messy. But the very thing they're trying to avoid, hurt, disappointment, abandonment, ends up finding them anyway. Because in trying to protect themselves, they end up pushing away the one person who was willing to stay, to love them as they are, to meet them where they're at. The tragedy is that it often takes the loss of that person for the avoidant to realize the cost of their emotional distance. What started as protection eventually turns into regret. And not just any regret, the kind that keeps you up at night, the kind that gnaws at your chest when you see their name pop up on social media, knowing you could have had something real, but you didn't know how to let it in. Avoidants don't just miss the person, they miss the chance, the version of themselves they might have become if they had let love in instead of pushing it away. The narrative they've built for years, that they don't need anyone. That independence is everything, starts to crack. Because now they're alone, not by choice, but by consequence. And that's a different kind of loneliness. Not solitude, but isolation. The painful kind that follows knowing someone cared and you couldn't or wouldn't receive it. What makes it worse is that avoidants often don't even realize this shift until it's too late. While the relationship is active, they may feel irritated by intimacy, uncomfortable with affection, eager for more space. But once the person is gone, truly gone, emotionally and physically, the absence reveals something they didn't expect. They miss the safety they felt, even if they couldn't admit it at the time. They miss the emotional availability they didn't know how to match. They miss being loved. And in that moment, the illusion of protection falls apart. Avoidance didn't keep them safe. It kept them stuck. It built walls where bridges could have been. It disguised fear as strength. And the result wasn't peace. It was distance, followed by loss. So while it may have felt like a smart move to avoid discomfort or vulnerability, it cost them something much greater in the long run. A real human connection with someone who saw their heart and chose to care anyway. The person who cares deeply for someone with avoidant tendencies often enters the relationship with patience, empathy, and a willingness to understand. They sense the walls, they feel the pushback, but something tells them it's worth it. They believe in the connection in the moments when the avoidant lets their guard down, even if those moments are rare and fleeting. So they stay, they try, they give reassurance. They don't take the distance personally, even when it hurts, because they see the avoidant not as cold, but as scared, and they hope that, in time, love will be enough to make it safe. This kind of patience isn't passive, it's an active emotional labor. It requires constantly reading between the lines, offering softness in the face of withdrawal, and maintaining emotional balance when their own needs aren't fully met. The one who cares learns how to give space, how to check in without pressuring, how to love without overwhelming. But over time, this care can become exhausting. They begin to notice the patterns, moments of closeness followed by emotional shutdowns, warmth followed by silence, connection followed by retreat. It starts to feel like they're dancing alone, trying to hold together a bond that's being quietly pulled apart by fear. At first, they tell themselves it's just timing or stress or past trauma. And often it is. They believe that love can heal, that their consistency will be enough to make the avoidant feel safe. So they stay longer, they give more, they suppress their own needs to avoid triggering another retreat. But eventually, something changes. The imbalance becomes too loud to ignore. The silence after vulnerability, the lack of reciprocation, the emotional absences, it all adds up. They realize they're loving someone who isn't meeting them halfway, that they're constantly proving their worth to someone who is too afraid to receive it. That's when they stop knocking. Not because they've stopped caring, but because they've run out of ways to reach someone who keeps closing the door. They don't slam the door themselves. They don't make a dramatic exit. They simply stop calling. They stop initiating. They stop waiting for something to change. And that quiet withdrawal, the one avoidants never expect, is the end of the relationship, even if no final conversation is had. Avoidants often assume the person who cares will always be there, that the more they pull away, the more the other person will chase. And sometimes that's true. For a while. But even the most patient partner has a limit. Love can endure a lot, but it can't thrive in emotional absence forever. And when the one who cared finally leaves, they don't look back. Not because they never loved, but because they've given all they could. They've learned the hard way that staying with someone who won't let them in is a form of self-abandonment. And by the time the avoidant realizes what they've lost, the chance to repair it is already gone. When the relationship finally ends and the person who cared walks away, the avoidant is often left in silence, but not the peaceful kind. At first, they may feel relief. The pressure is gone. The emotional intensity has faded. No more expectations, no more uncomfortable conversations, no more closeness they didn't know how to navigate. But that relief is short-lived, because the silence doesn't bring peace, it brings awareness. Slowly, the absence of the person who cared begins to echo louder than any argument or emotional moment ever did. They start to notice the gap where the other person's presence used to be. The morning texts stop coming, the check-ins vanish, the soft encouragements, the understanding nods, the way that person used to look at them like they mattered, all gone. And in that space, the avoidant is left with thoughts they don't know how to escape. They begin to replay memories, not just the big moments, but the small ones. The late night talks, the way they were held even when they pulled away, the messages that said, "I'm here," even after days of silence. But now no one is there. The avoidant sits with their thoughts, and what surfaces isn't relief, it's longing. And this is where the struggle begins, because the one thing they spent the entire relationship avoiding, vulnerability, emotional exposure, true intimacy, is now the thing they crave the most, but they don't know how to get it back. Reaching out would mean confronting their own role in the loss. It would mean admitting that their emotional walls didn't protect them, they isolated them. And so, instead of reaching out, many avoidants retreat even further into themselves. They stalk social media from a distance, hoping for a glimpse of what that person is doing now. They read old messages just to feel close again, to remember what it was like to be cared for without having to earn it. They may even try to convince themselves they're fine, that this is better, that they're just not built for relationships. But beneath all that, the struggle intensifies, because the absence isn't just about missing a person, it's about missing what that person represented: safety, connection, unconditional presence. The hardest part is that avoidants often can't express what they feel, even to themselves. The emotional vocabulary wasn't developed. Feelings were minimized, avoided, rationalized. Now that grief and regret surface, they don't know how to process it. So they suffer in silence. They appear distant to the outside world, detached. But internally, they're battling memories, shame, and an aching sense of what if? And the pain lingers, because unlike impulsive decisions or accidental mistakes, this loss feels earned. It came from a pattern, one they now see, but didn't know how to break at the time. The avoidant struggles not only with the absence of the other person, but with the realization that the very things they thought protected them were the reasons they're now alone. They didn't lose the person because they weren't loved. They lost them because they couldn't accept the love being given. And that truth is something they carry quietly every day. Love, to an avoidant, can often feel like a trap. It feels like pressure, like exposure, like a threat to their independence. So when someone shows up with genuine affection, consistency, and emotional presence, the avoidant instinct isn't to lean in, it's to retreat. Not because they don't care, but because caring makes them vulnerable. And vulnerability has, at some point in their life, been tied to pain, disappointment, or abandonment. So they've trained themselves to believe that self-reliance is the only form of safety. To need nothing is to risk nothing. But here's the painful irony. The love they resist isn't there to cage them, it's there to free them. Real love doesn't demand perfection or complete surrender. It asks for presence, for honesty, for effort. It doesn't threaten freedom, it enhances it. Because when someone accepts you as you are and wants to build something with you, they're not asking you to give yourself up. They're asking you to let yourself be seen. And that's what avoidants fear the most. Over time, though, what initially feels like protection begins to resemble isolation. The avoidant keeps love at arm's length and tells themselves it's a strength, that they're just being smart, cautious, emotionally mature. But when the one who cared is finally gone, they realize what they mistook as pressure was actually an invitation to grow. The discomfort they felt wasn't a red flag. It was the stretching of emotional muscles that had been ignored for too long. They look back and see that love wasn't trying to control them. It was trying to reach them. It wasn't asking for their freedom. It was asking for their presence. To show up not as a flawless, always composed individual, but as a messy, growing, real human being. Love wanted to be something safe, something steady, something healing. But fear won out, and now the gift is gone. Avoidants often tell themselves that emotions are overwhelming, that closeness is too risky. But in truth, it's the resistance to those things that creates chaos. Being loved isn't the problem. It's the internal dialogue that tells them they don't deserve it or can't handle it or will lose themselves in it. That's the real trap, not love. And when they finally see this, it hits hard. They recognize that the very thing they avoided could have been the doorway to something profoundly transformative, not just in the relationship, but in how they see themselves. Because real love doesn't shrink you, it expands you, it makes you more aware, more capable, more connected to your own emotional world. But by pushing it away, they didn't avoid pain. They delayed it, and now they're left with the realization that love wasn't trying to break them down. It was trying to build something better with them, something honest, something mutual, something real. Pain has a way of stopping us in our tracks. For someone with avoidant tendencies, it often arrives not with drama, but in the quiet aftermath, the moment when they realize the person who once cared deeply for them is truly gone. There are no more chances to delay intimacy, no more emotional lifelines being thrown their way. And in that stillness, they're forced to sit with what they've done, or rather, what they've avoided doing. It's in this silence, this stillness, that a powerful opportunity begins to emerge. Avoidants are not incapable of love. They're not broken or heartless. They're often people who have learned somewhere in their past that love was inconsistent, conditional, or even dangerous. So they built survival strategies, emotional distance, hyper-independence, withdrawal to keep themselves safe. But those same strategies eventually push away exactly what they long for: real connection. When the pain of that loss finally cuts through their defenses, something changes. They begin to ask different questions. Not, what was wrong with them? But, why couldn't I let them in? Not, why didn't they stay? But, why was I so afraid of closeness? And that's where transformation begins, not in comfort, but in confrontation. The confrontation with their own patterns, their own fears, their own deeply buried wounds. This pain, as sharp and disorienting as it may be, can become a teacher. It reveals truths they may have spent years trying to avoid. That connection is not the enemy, that love is not a threat, that vulnerability isn't weakness. It opens a doorway to growth if they're willing to walk through it. Because in the absence of the one who cared, the avoidantly gets the chance to care for themselves in a different way. Not by shutting down, but by opening up. For the first time, they might consider therapy or read the messages they ignored with new eyes. They may reflect on how their silence, their avoidance, wasn't strength. It was fear dressed in armor. And instead of retreating into the same old habits, they might start choosing differently, responding instead of withdrawing, expressing rather than deflecting, asking for help instead of pretending they don't need anyone. It doesn't happen overnight, but every moment of discomfort becomes a step toward emotional maturity. Every pang of regret becomes motivation to become someone who can not only receive love, but also reciprocate it fully. The pain they once tried to avoid becomes the very catalyst for growth they needed all along. Eventually, they realize that healing isn't about becoming someone different. It's about becoming more honest with themselves. It's about peeling back the layers of protection that no longer serve them and allowing themselves to feel, to trust, to connect. The struggle after losing someone who cared is real, but it doesn't have to be the end of the story. For the avoidant, it can be the beginning of becoming someone who's no longer afraid to be known, loved, and emotionally present, not just for someone else, but for themselves. So here we are. We've walked through the quiet H that avoidants often face after pushing away the one person who truly cared. We've looked at the walls they build, the patterns they repeat, and the pain they try so hard to avoid, only to find it sitting with them anyway once love is gone. But this isn't about blame. It's about awareness. Because no matter how far someone has run from intimacy, no matter how much they've shut down or pushed others away, there is always a choice in front of them to keep repeating what's familiar or to grow into what's possible. Yes, avoidants struggle when they lose real love. But struggle isn't failure, it's feedback. It's life's way of saying something deeper is asking for your attention. If you've ever been the one who cared and you walked away, know that you weren't weak. You were wise enough to stop pouring into someone who wouldn't open their hands. And if you're the one who pushed someone away and now you're feeling the weight of that loss, don't waste it. Let it shape you. Let it wake you up. Let it teach you how to be brave in the face of connection instead of afraid. Because love doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for presence. And it will meet you there if you let it. Thank you so much for giving your time, your mind, and maybe even your heart to this message. Whether you saw yourself in the avoidant, the one who cared, or somewhere in between, your willingness to reflect is already a step toward growth. Take what resonates, heal what hurts, and never forget you're allowed to love and be loved without hiding. Thank you for being here. Until next time, take care of your heart and take care of the hearts that try to reach yours.